That's the magic wand they have to wave over what can't be explained. Okay, cool. We can go down that road in a moment. But in the meantime, admit that those first 5 things I just mentioned, cosmic, stellar, chemical, organic, and macroevolution, are things you believe. Because if I ask for an example, the only thing that anyone will ever give me and will ever give you is an example of number 6, and pretend that it somehow makes the other ones come true magically. You have to still believe that.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the It Stands Written podcast. My name is Braden, and today I have a guest with us. We have Gavin. He is a good friend from church. Gavin, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself? We like to do how long you've been following the Lord and just fun fact about yourself.
Okay. I've been following the Lord since I was about 23. Fun fact, I guess, would be to say that I was raised in a mixed home. My dad was Catholic, my mom was Jewish, and I was confused. And I was told that I was Jewish, but never. I had what you might call atheist moments, or practical atheist moments for sure.
Mm-hmm.
But didn't grow up in a Christian household. Was an enemy of Christ for a long time. Would have scoffed at the very things we're going to talk about tonight had I been given the chance. God's brought me full circle on this.
That's super good. Wow. So you've been following the Lord for like 55 years then?
Yeah, it makes me 50. Yeah, exactly. Makes me 70 something.
Yeah, for sure. But today we're starting a new series. We're talking about creation versus evolution. So Gavin, you've done a bunch of research. You've studied this for a while. You've taught on this for a long time. So today it's just going to be kind of an introduction episode, and then we're going to get more in depth as we go on, answer some really important and tough questions. So Gavin, you're the expert on this. I'm going to kind of just hand it over to you. You just kind of walk us through it, explain it, and we'll go from there. Sound good?
Yeah.
Cool.
All right. Well, we're going to talk about creation versus evolution. And just to pause on this for a moment, a lot of people say that I've already set things up for a false dichotomy, that there might be a third and fourth and however many options. The truth is there are only 2. And if you think about it, the closest anyone has ever come to a third would be some blend of just those 2. Mm-hmm. And that actually, we might say that confused camp that's contradictory in all ways was one that I was once part of, which is to say that perhaps God created evolution, because I didn't have a way to explain this without feeling like I was being dishonest or something, since science had taught me as a, publicly schooled kid that it was a fact that evolution had occurred. And of course, I tried to cram that into my understanding of creation and couldn't do it in good conscience, but pretended I could. So the fact is, if you believe in God creating things through evolution, the fact is you still believe that evolution occurred.
Yeah.
There's really no third option here. Okay. And if you understand anything about creation and evolution, you'll realize that they can't be crammed together, which is what we'll talk about in just a moment. So I want to talk about discernment and what it means just by definition. There's a few, but they mean really the same thing, which is that is the quality of being able to grasp or comprehend what is obscure. It stresses the power to distinguish or select what is true or appropriate. It talks about sifting truth from error, right from wrong. In Hebrew, there's the word bin, which means insight or understanding. It talks about separating things from one another at their points of difference to make a distinction. And that's what we want to do. We want to separate things that are oftentimes crammed together. You'll find this is a tricky thing, but we're going to sort that out. So I want to talk about worldviews just for a second. And a worldview is how you view the world. Okay. If I'm zooming out to a macro view of this, you might say there's a creation worldview and there's an evolution worldview. And a creation worldview, according to the Bible, has a recent history that started approximately 6,000 years ago. Whereas an evolution worldview says, no, things started out roughly 20 billion years ago. And of course, that number just keeps growing because they need more time to fit in this fairy tale they call evolution. According to creation, Earth was created before the sun. But according to evolution, it's just the opposite. In creation, oceans came before land. In evolution, land came before oceans. In creation, light before sun. In creation, land plants first. Instead of marine life first. In creation, fruit trees before fish. In evolution, fish before fruit trees. Everything is backwards.
Yeah.
According to the Bible, man brought death into the world, and death by sin. We're responsible for this problem. We've created it. But according to evolution, death, you might say natural selection, filtering random mutations is what brought man into the world. So it's just completely opposite. According to the Bible, God created man. And according to evolution, man created God. According to creation, things are worsening quickly, but according to evolution, things are improving slowly. So if you were trapped, without a Bible, in desperate need of one, and life was tough and you thought, man, I have minutes left to live. I need a Bible. I need to find one. And all you can find is a textbook on evolution. You're probably going to be okay. Because if you read everything that it says and believe the exact opposite, you'll become a Christian just like that.
Right.
It is that far polarized from what reality is. It is that satanic. It is that different from what God has said that you can just simply believe the opposite and you're probably going to be okay. Of course, I don't want to make light of this because the gospel is not something you get by believing the opposite of an evolution book, but you get the point.
Yeah.
According to the Bible, in the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. Okay. If you've ever heard of the space-time continuum, it works like this. They say, if you had matter, but no space, where would you put it? If you had matter and space, but no time, when would you put it? Right.
Yeah.
The idea is that these things have some sort of codependency. They have to come into existence at the same time for any of them to exist.
Right.
In the beginning, that's time. God created the heaven, that's space. And the earth, that's matter. He is saying in the very first opening sentence of the book he wrote for us, I'm the one who's responsible for all you see. The space-time continuum started with me, right? And God said, let there be light. And there was light, and God saw the light that it was good. And God divided the light from the darkness. And God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And the evening and the morning were the first day. Not one day, not, one of several days, but rather the first day. If I said, hey, one day something happened, I might be referring to a number of days. But when the Bible speaks about this, it's very clear on the matter. It also adds evening and morning, just in case anybody wants to believe that these are long periods of time. There are occasions where the Bible refers to a day as a long period of time. It might say something like, in the day of Moses, which would refer to his lifetime. But in this case, it's talking about an evening and a morning, so nobody gets confused. And this is something that an ordinary human being could pick up and read and understand without someone explaining to them that it really means something different than what it says. That's very close to getting into a cult, really.
Yeah.
Now, according to the Bible, there were long times of period people could live that we've never experienced ourselves, right? Hundreds of years, almost up to 1,000 years. For example, according to the Bible, Adam lived to 930. Okay. Jared, one of his, great-great-great-grandsons, lived to 962. If you look in Genesis chapter 5, it's a genealogy that goes from Adam to Noah. And Adam is a name that carries a meaning like all names, or like most names. Adam means man, or it means man of the dirt or man of the clay. In other languages, it's pronounced differently. For example, I'm told it's Nuhu in Chinese, but it means the same thing. His son's name was Seth. And his son's name was Enos. And it goes down Canaan, Mahalalel, Jared, Enoch, Methuselah, Lamech, Noah. Who cares? Well, if you read the meaning of those names in the same order that they appear according to the genealogy, it says this: man appointed mortal sorrow. The blessed God shall come down, teaching. His death shall bring the despairing comfort. Miniature gospel contained right there.
So good.
Yeah. And I should stop here to point out, I don't believe in hidden messages in the Bible. This is not a hidden message. This is actually loudly proclaimed in all places of the Bible. It's just another copy of the things you'll find in the Gospels and in Isaiah 53, places like that. But you asked me before we started the podcast to talk a little bit about my testimony. Without a whole lot of detail, I will say that this had a huge impact on me because growing up, Jewish, bar mitzvah at 13, all these different kinds of things. The one thing I was confident of was that Jesus was a fraud, that he was in no way deity. I didn't believe in the Trinity. I thought that anybody who believed that had committed some kind of a intellectual suicide, because you can't be both, your father and a son at the same time, God, these things. But of course, the truth is it is three persons in one Godhead. And though I can't explain how that works, we know that it's true. And this is how this really helped me understand it. According to this, man appointed mortal sorrow. That's the death before sin thing we talked about. That's impossible. Death is the result of sin. Mm-hmm. The blessed God shall come down teaching. His death shall bring the despairing comfort or rest. Okay, well, if that's true, then it was the blessed God who came down teaching, whose death brought the despairing comfort or rest.
Yeah.
And so apparently the Son of God is God in the flesh.
Yeah.
Can't explain how, but this is something that was very clarifying for me. I'd been studying, I'd actually seen this and didn't come full circle immediately, but through some study in DNA, was learning about a molecule, I should say a protein, known as RNA polymerase. And RNA polymerase has the job of sliding down the spine of DNA and reading the characters of it, A, C, T, G, the abbreviations for the nucleotide bases. And as it does that, they discovered, probably it's been 20 years ago now, that sometimes it will skip places. It might move 10 spaces, for example. Okay. And within the first code is a second code that is also functional. And within a further step of spaces, say 100 or 1,000, sometimes more than 1,000,000, sometimes an entire chromosome, they found there was one sequence embedded within another sequence, also functional. And this RNA polymerase was reading them all and turning them into functional proteins or operating system, whatever its purpose was. And we realized pretty quickly that this macromolecule DNA has an information-bearing capacity far beyond anything we can actually measure, simply because we have no idea how many messages are embedded within the first message. As an example, if I sent you combat directives on a letter, okay, back when we didn't have email and things like that, I'd be concerned that it might be intercepted by someone who wanted to do us harm, and our cover's blown, we can't ambush, we're in a lot of trouble. So what I do is I make the first letter of each sentence the actual message. Okay, maybe the one that I sent you is intentionally deceptive. It's a decoy, right? Yeah. But what happens is it's just an example of there being one code within another. Now, if I gave you the task of translating that letter into 10 different languages, then bringing it back to you, it'd be pretty hard to end up in the same spot where the first letter of each sentence still made the original message. But what's amazing is God used a genealogy so that even though this Bible has been translated into every language there is practically, you'll always find that the story it tells is retained because he put it in a genealogy. So you might say, for example, instead of Gavin begat Braden, because I'm almost old enough, right? Yeah. You might say Braden was begotten of Gavin. The point is that sequence, to be faithful to a translation, is still retained, right? And no matter how that name is pronounced, the meaning is still the same. So no matter what translation you pick up, including the false ones, you can show this to a Jehovah's Witness sometime who's using New World Translation. Just turn them right there and say, hey guys, this is a place that your quote editors, translators missed it, but it shows clearly that Christ is in fact God. And so I had unabashedly concluded at this point that there was a common authorship between the God who wrote our DNA and the God who'd written the Bible, because I wondered, okay, do we have, many gods who compete for this spot who say they did it, right? Yeah. The God of the Quran, you fill in the blank, doesn't matter. The fact is, I concluded a common authorship, seeing how the DNA was written, how God had used this overlapping sequencing, for lack of better terms, to show that he, in fact, wasn't just, the creator, but that this was God in the flesh. And it kind of clarified for me some things that had held me up for a long time. Yeah. So according to these timelines, the creationist timeline is something that's very short. We're talking around, not to be exact, 6,000 years, and scripture's not going to let you get much closer than that. Okay. According to it, there was a flood 4,400 years ago, and about 2,000 years ago, we had the birth of Christ. Now, according to an evolutionist timescale, if we're going back 20 billion years ago, where the Big Bang supposedly occurred, and then you have Earth cooling down and man evolved in the last 2 seconds, according to this scale, you could draw these out on paper, okay? And let's just say the creation one was my wingspan. It's about 6 feet wide, okay? If I did the same scale where 150 years is equivalent to an inch, and I applied it to the one that's the evolutionist time scale, it would stretch from basically one side of our nation to the other. It's about California to New York. So the reason I point this out is because the differences here aren't they're not insignificant. They're huge. Okay. We can't all be close enough is good enough on this. There's huge problems with this. And so a lot of people wonder, well, who cares about the age of the earth itself, the number? And I would say, I don't particularly care about it myself, except for a couple things would matter. One is, if you have billions of years, you've now placed death before sin, whether you intended to or not. Okay, there's a lot of true Christians out there who don't realize that it might not be heresy to say, well, I think the earth is older than, you're saying, Gavin, but of course, Gavin's deriving this from scripture. So, be careful here. But even if you said that, we couldn't say that it was heresy. We might just stop at a disagreement. However, if you said, well, I believe that there was death that preceded sin, now you have a heresy, right? Because in this case, you're making God responsible for the problem.
God's the author of death.
Yeah, exactly. It was his fault that we're in this position, when in reality, he made everything great. He said it was good, and yet we've ruined it. Right. Okay. Now, the other thing is, it's pretty easy, even for a little kid, to pick up their science textbook and read millions of years and immediately call into question the things they read in their Bible, because they just don't find that there. And if the authenticity of Genesis is at stake, then so too is everything in the scripture that follows. And if you can't trust a sentence out of the first book, why should you trust any in the following? You shouldn't. It's a waste of your time. You can actually prove that it's just not true and move on with your life, which is what a lot of these people would like to do.
Right.
So let's move on real quick. I want to talk about evidence and how we weigh it and how we compare things. So the most critical thing here is, I'm just going to say, it's honesty, right? We're after truth.
Yeah.
And for anybody who's willing to discuss this, debate this, we all have to at least be on the same page that we're going to be honest no matter how unpopular it is, because when it comes to seeking truth, that's all that matters. You've got to just take it for what it is. So science is a word that's frequently misused, but let's just get its definition. Its definition is knowledge derived through observation. It is indisputable proof. It means truth. Okay. In the Latin, it means to know. It's facts. These aren't things that you can say, well, I have an opinion about that. No, you don't. Now, when it comes to faith, faith is confidence or trust in a person or a thing. Okay. You might not be able to prove it. It doesn't mean that you're wrong, but it's something that can't be observed. It's something that can't be repeated, those kinds of things necessarily. Right. So it's a belief not based on proof. It's a theory. Right. So whenever someone says, I have a scientific theory, I say, you mean you have a theory? Because there's really no such thing as a scientific theory if you think about it. Right.
Until it's substantiated. Knowledge and fact.
Yeah, exactly. It's just a theory until one day maybe you do substantiate it and become science. Until then, there's no such thing as a scientific theory.
Yeah.
Nitpicking here. What's interesting is the Bible in Hebrews 11, verse 1 says, now faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. So the Bible is in agreement, you might say, with the dictionary, or better, you might say the dictionary is in agreement with the Bible. Okay. That says there are some things we know and there's some things that we believe. Okay. Now, if we're being honest about this, and I will be throughout this, I promise. And if anybody has questions or contacts us, I'm happy to look at everything with complete honesty. I want to use a filter that's helpful for discerning these things. Okay. So there are 6 meanings of the word evolution. Okay. And if you can filter out which of the 6 meanings are being used, you can pretty much win the battle, if that's what it were, on evolution every single time you have it. Okay. Even if this is new to you. You'll take on the most elite scientist or self-proclaimed sophisticate and still come out on top, because all you have to do is define terms and be honest about them. And I don't think that's asking much.
Right.
The first of the 6 meanings of evolution is cosmic. Okay. And cosmic refers to time, space, and matter, which we talked about just a moment ago. Now, I'll pause here to say that some people would say at this point, they're probably, upset that I've used the word cosmic evolution, because they might say, no, there's other terms for how the universe was born. And it's not called cosmic evolution, Gavin. Okay. There might be other things we can call it, but if the substance is the same, what we're referring to, then I won't fight about it. I'll call it whatever they want to. I'll just give up right now and say, let's call it what you want to call it. If we're talking about the same thing, then let's move on, because I'm going to prove to you what matters is that it didn't happen by itself.
Yeah.
Or if I'm not going to prove it, I'm going to show that you're faithful for believing it just like I am.
Right.
So we've got a few competing hypotheses here. One would be the Big Bang. Everyone's familiar with that. Okay. Another would be biblical creation or steady state theory, some kind of eternal existence type thing. The fact is, no one saw this thing start and cannot prove that it was eternal. In fact, you might say that the eternal part has been disproven, in fact, by Einstein, who said if there was an infinite number of moments behind us, how could we ever make it to the one that we're at?
Right.
He's trying to make the point that it started somewhere.
Yeah.
Okay. So if you want to believe it happened through creation or the Big Bang, you have to admit that it's by faith that you believe that, because you didn't see it. So for someone to say, well, I'm scientific about this and you're a Christian, you're faithful, I say, actually, let's put the brakes on for a second and define some terms.
Yeah.
You didn't see it happen. Right. The second kind is called stellar evolution. It refers to the planets and the stars. We have never seen a star form. Okay. There aren't even any good ideas about how it could happen. Okay. This is something that if you look, it's highly controversial among the people who believe in it, because they've never seen it. And if someone did, case closed. All we've ever seen is that when gases are out there, they seem to separate from one another. They don't compress unless they're actually being compressed. And that's not happening in this frictionless environment that's almost completely vacuum. It's like a few protons per cubic meter throughout all of outer space virtually. Yeah. Right. And so we've never seen that happen. According to the Bible, God says, yeah, I made those also. And he words it almost just like that. Read Genesis. Okay. So he is saying, I made it. They didn't happen on their own. So if you want to believe it happened by itself, go ahead, but admit that it's faith and don't call yourself scientific anymore. Join me in admitting that we didn't see it.
Right.
The third kind is called chemical evolution, which refers to the periodic table and the origin of the elements. And according to Big Bang theory, Just a couple were created. The first lightweight ones, helium, hydrogen, stuff like that. The trouble is the periodic table has a lot of heavy elements, and they're all becoming lighter with time. Okay. And they say, well, what about fusion? Some of them get heavier. Sure. The problem is fusion becomes a very difficult problem past iron, and it really can't be done as far as I know. Okay. So they still have to explain everything beyond that. And there are so many. So if you want to believe that it happened by itself, go ahead and believe it. You haven't seen it. Mm-hmm. Stop telling me that I'm the faithful Christian and you're the big bad scientist. We're both faithful when it comes to this.
Yeah.
The next one is organic evolution. Some people say, no, it's not. It's called abiogenesis or abiogenesis, and fight over even how it's pronounced. The fact is, it's referring to the same thing here. We're talking about the emergence of life from non-living material.
Yeah.
Okay. We've never observed that. The only thing we've ever seen is that life comes from other life, right? Plants make seeds, or other plants like them, parents, whatever, make their kids. You come from some other life. That's all we've ever observed.
Yeah.
So we'll dedicate entire episodes if there's time to this topic. This is kind of one of my favorites.
Yeah.
Macroevolution refers to a change of kinds. So when we talk about kinds, we're referring to broad categories here, right? With taxonomy, this would be like the difference between, say, a snail and a palm tree. Okay. Mm-hmm. According to the Bible, things take after their kind, meaning that they don't become something else, even if you give them enough time.
Right.
They're going to stay bound to that minor differential of, color variation, size, things like that, but ultimately stay the same. So we've never observed macroevolution, which is to say that we've never seen a dog turn into a tree. And someone might stop there and go, well, that's ridiculous. No one said that happened. Yes, you did. Mm-hmm. Yes, you did.
Yeah.
You said that all these things share a common ancestry.
Yeah.
Okay. And so if you trace it back far enough, those things are actually related.
Right.
We have a common descent. So the dog and the tree are related. Maybe they aren't saying the dad was, the tree and the dog came later. But the point is they're believing that these things all came from a common ancestor.
Right.
And it started with basically a primordial soup, the bubbling broth of complex chemicals.
Yep.
And of course, if you want to believe that, go ahead. But we've never observed that. What we have observed is the last variety. This is the sixth meaning, and it's called microevolution. It refers to speciation. There's a wide variety of dogs that will come from just one litter. Okay. You'll see them. They don't even look like their brother and sister. They may not look like their parents, all of them. Mm-hmm. Right. Yet they're still dogs, and they can breed with other dogs. Right. Yeah. It's possible to get a Chihuahua and a Great Dane to make a dog. Google it. Mm-hmm. Okay. It's been done. But it's not going to make something other than a dog, no matter how much time you give it.
Right.
Okay. So according to science and the things we observe, the Bible is right on every single occasion we have ever observed. These species, these animals are taking after their kind, as do plants. They don't become some other kind.
Right.
And of course, what will happen is they'll say, we haven't given enough time, Gavin. That's the magic wand they have to wave over what can't be explained. Mm-hmm. Okay, cool. We can go down that road in a moment. But in the meantime, admit that those first 5 things I just mentioned, cosmic, stellar, chemical, organic, and macroevolution, are things you believe. Because if I ask for an example, the only thing that anyone will ever give me and will ever give you is an example of number 6, and pretend that it somehow makes the other ones come true magically. You have to still believe that.
Right.
You're believing that eventually, with enough time, the cat will turn into a dog. The cat will turn into something new we haven't heard of yet, whatever it is.
Right.
Scientifically, the Bible is correct. They take after their kind, and that's all we've ever observed. It's an uncommon descent. They stay in their lines. Now, the Bible says this, and you got to listen carefully, guys, because this is not a warning about science, and we have no reason to fear science as Christians. Paul said to Timothy, O Timothy, keep that which is committed to thy trust, avoiding profane and vain babblings and oppositions of science, falsely so called. He's not saying avoid science. He's saying oppositions of science, falsely so called. It's false to refer to organic evolution as science. It's false to refer to stellar evolution as science.
Yeah.
Right? So all we have to do as Christians is be honest and tell the truth and say there's some things we know for facts, and there's other things that we have to say we believe because we weren't there to observe it ourselves.
Right.
Okay. So if you look, and this is a great example. I learned all this from somebody else. So if anybody accuses me of plagiarism, forgive me in advance. I'm not the author of all the things that I'm repeating here. Decon rat poison is one of the best examples of this. Decon rat poison is 99% good, healthy, nutritious food. It's the 1% that's poison, and that 1% isn't palatable. It's unnoticed, and it kills the rat. So what I have here, and if you think these are dumb examples, especially the last one, I'm going to tell you that it's not, I didn't make it up. Okay. The first ones are going to sound familiar. If I said, hey, similar skeletal structures in humans and apes prove common ancestry, part of that's true. The whole of it's not. What part of the sentence is a fact? Well, it's true that the humans and the apes have a similar skeletal structure.
Right.
Okay. They look a lot alike.
Yeah.
It doesn't prove they have common ancestry.
Right.
An alternative might be maybe they have a common designer and he just knows that there's certain things that work well, so he's going to use them in more than one place.
Exactly.
Slowly, over billions of years, Earth's layers of rock and ice accumulated. Well, we know they accumulated. How long did it take? Well, some of it we've observed, actually. We could say it happened rather quickly. What we haven't observed is the billions of years. So if they want to say it happened slowly, they're welcome to believe it. But again, we've just mixed something that was true with something that wasn't. And like decon rat poison, it's easy for a kid to take the whole thing in one scoop and say, okay, I guess it's all right.
Right.
Now, this last one's the one you're going to think I'm making up, but I want you to know I heard this somewhere on a TV show. There was a dumb show. I think it was on Discovery years ago. And I think it was called Dinosaur Fights. I've tried to find this clip because it was so ridiculous, but they were saying that scientists now know that velociraptor dinosaurs use quick hand gestures to coordinate an attack. And I remember when I wasn't a Christian when I saw this, but I was pretty much onto this stuff at the time.
Yeah.
My sister was living with me, and I threw the remote at the TV. I said, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. And she calmed me down and said, Gavin, that's the evolution of the gang sign. That's where it all started. I said, you know what? You're right. That makes a lot of sense. That's why they throw signs before they fight. This is something completely made up.
Right.
No one was there to see it. You can't tell from bones that anything happened.
Yeah.
Right. You want to fill in the blanks and say, for example, there have been occasions where they find a tooth in the ground. And before you know it, they've drawn its entire family and talk about what it was like and everything and things it used to eat. And it's like, are you sure just based on a flat tooth or a sharp tooth that it only ate plants or animals? You're not, but who cares? You've filled in the blank with so many things that were imaginative. And yet, since you're a scientist, people go along with it. It's just not true.
Yeah.
So anyhow, everything tends towards disorder. That's what the second law of thermodynamics says. And certainly evolution is opposed to this. It's just not possible. These things are getting worse with time. We're not getting better. We're getting worse. And in any example, you might say, well, what about all the things science has done for us in medicine? Yeah, that's through creation. That requires an actual mind behind it to make that happen. By itself, disorder is just disorderly, and it stays that way. You just approach entropy. That's all it is. Now, if you look at the, what's it called? The Descent of Man picture, the March of Man, it's the ape who, through maybe 5 intermediate steps, becomes a man. You'll notice a couple things about it. One is it's a drawing every time. You've got 1,000 renditions, but the point is we've never seen an intermediary between a human and an ape, nor have we, listen carefully, ever found an intermediate fossil between a human and an ape. Mm-hmm. When you see it in your science book, you go, well, that made sense when I looked at it, but no, I guess I didn't call into question the fact that it was a drawing. And yeah, those things in the middle of the ape and the human, I've never seen. Well, that's because they don't exist. And you might say, well, wait a second, I've seen some bones, though, they lined up and it kind of looked like that. And those were photographs, Gavin. Yeah, you have. They aligned them in the order that it made it look most real. But it's just a bone and it doesn't tell a story. And they can't prove that it had any offspring. There's a lot of problems with this. You're trying to prove a point that can't be proved. They also maybe didn't tell you that there is no such thing as an intermediary fossil, that has ever been found connecting any two different kinds of animals anywhere. That alone, we could stop here. And if you're being honest with yourself, go, okay, you know what? I'm wrong if I believed in evolution, just like I was. Mm-hmm. Now, there's lots of renditions of it. Blow them all off. They're wrong. I used to have a T-shirt that had that. And on it, the guy had turned around to face the stack of apes that were following him, all the freaks they'd drawn. And it said, stop following me. We're not related. So just saying, we shall have shirts like that.
Yeah.
And God said, let the earth bring forth the living creature after his kind, cattle and creeping thing. Notice how these categories are separated. And beast of the earth after his kind. And it was so. And yeah, it is. It's so today. So whose idea was evolution anyway? A lot of us are going to attribute this to Charles Darwin. And he did make it pretty famous. It didn't start there, though. Now the serpent was more subtle than any beast of the field which the Lord God had made. And he said unto the woman, Yea, hath God said, Ye shall not eat of every tree of the garden? And the woman said unto the serpent, We may eat of the fruit of the trees of the garden. But the fruit of the tree which is in the midst of the garden, God hath said, Ye shall not eat of it, neither shall ye touch it, lest ye die. And the serpent said unto the woman, Ye shall not surely die. Apparently God's a liar. For God doth know that in the day ye eat thereof, then your eyes shall be opened, and ye shall be as gods, knowing good and evil. Gods. The idea here is we're going to become better, stronger, smarter, faster. All things about us become better with time, which is exactly what evolution teaches. There's been this huge progress from a single cell organism to where we are today.
Right.
And this is not an idea that started with Darwin. Now, I want to talk about the age of the earth for a second. And there's a question commonly, well, is there any evidence for this? And as I go through this, since this is just audio, feel free to pause it and go online and Google everything I'm talking about so you can see the photos for yourself. Now, when you look at pictures of fossils and things like that, I just want to pause for a second and point out that they are not evidence of very much. They're evidence of death, flooding, certain conditions that would cause something to fossilize as opposed to rot. But they don't tell you anything about when they were made. They don't tell you if they had any kids. And you might say, well, there might be some exceptions to that. You might be able to tell that one had kids, but what you don't know is what their kids looked like. And I'll just take this a step farther. You don't know that it had parents. Now, I'm not saying this is likely, but I'm just saying it's possible that what you're looking at in this fossil was God's alpha creation, had no parents other than God who created it. Okay. The point is you don't know much by looking at it. So stop filling in stories behind it and surrounding it. Okay. But here's what we know about fossilization. Fossilization occurs quickly. Now, you might think, well, I've read a million. In fact, I've never heard that. This is the first time I've heard that. I've only heard that it happens slowly. Well, this is actually a fact of science. I have here in front of me, you can go to bible.ca or just Google it, a fossilized hammer. And I'm showing Braden this picture right now. This is a hammer that's been covered in what was mud, and that mud has fossilized into rock, and it's covering the handle, and you can see where the handle goes through the head of it. Another one would be an example of a pickle that was less than 70 years old. That can be time-stamped for certain, that had fossilized. The edge of it is broken off because it was exposed to atmosphere. The lid had rusted and fallen down into the liquid and created just the right environment for this thing to turn to rock, and it did. So we know for a fact that fossilization occurs quickly. If you want to say it happens slowly, okay, well, we need to observe that still before we call that science. That's a theory. We know it happens quickly. Here's another example. Here's a picture of a fossilized cowboy's leg still in the boot. That's not millions of years old. That's not hundreds of years old, in fact. That's a lot less. Here's a hat partway through the fossilization process. This can be found at bible.ca also. Now, the Delk track, spelled D-E-L-K, is worth looking up. There was a guy named Alvis Delk, and I'll tell you, to the best of my recollection, how this came to be. Alvis Delk was on a dig, and he uncovered some rocks that he took home with him because he didn't have time at the dig site to go through all of it. It was just things he wanted to investigate more carefully. And one of these rocks laid in his backyard covered in mud for some time, maybe over a year. Alvis Delk was working on a ladder, something in his backyard, as I understand it. He took a hard fall and needed money to pay for a surgery. And around the time this fall had happened, he discovered something maybe just weeks prior to that incident. One of the rocks he brought home, when washed off, revealed two footprints, one of a human and one of a dinosaur. This was mud they had both stepped into, and then it solidified and became rock. Now, what's interesting is if these were, say, a couple feet apart, it would be pretty hard to tell who stepped down first. And of course, everyone would argue about what it was. But we don't have to guess on this one because the tracks intercept. And the mud from the footprint of the dinosaur displaced the mud where they intersect of the human, which means that the human stepped down first. Or it would have been just the other way around. Now, he sold this thing. He got some money. It was what he needed to pay for surgery. And then something happened. People said, wait a second, the story's too rich. Let's slow down for a second. We got this guy who brings home a bunch of random rocks, doesn't even know what they are when he brings them home, gets injured and needs money, and then produces this amazing thing that goes against what we've believed for so many years now. Oh, and one more thing. Elvis is a Christian. Probably making this up. Now, Elvis' response was, I don't know what to tell you. It's true. I don't really know what to do with this. Now, this happened about 2009. Okay. And a university was able to step in. I want to say it was Purdue, but go ahead and fact check me on this if you find differently. And they said, we have a way to test this thing because everyone's accusing him of having carved it. So what they did is they subjected it to spiral CT scan. And under that, they were able to see the density of the rock. Now, had it been a carving, the density would be about the same through and through. But if it was real, you'd find higher density under the pressure points of the heel, the tips of the toes, the edges of the mud where it's squished out by the feet. And lo and behold, that's exactly what they found.
Yeah.
And you can see the pictures of this online. And since then, nobody's made much fun of him online. It's been radio silence. He never got an apology. I guess he's still waiting for that. Yeah. The fact is, he found something that isn't, let's just put it this way. It's not something that as Christians, we have the burden of explaining. See, if you're a Christian, the delt track's not a problem for you.
Right.
This is actually, the God who said he created everything in 6 days. Well, apparently we were here pretty close to the time the dinosaurs were created. They might have been here before us. Yeah, I'll give you that much. Maybe a day. Maybe a couple. Okay, go read what the Bible says. You'll find out. It wasn't millions of years. It wasn't even a year. So why would something like this exist? It's pretty obvious. The Bible's true, and approximately 6,000 years ago, God created everything. It was then destroyed about 4,400 years ago in a flood, and some of it's preserved. No problem. It fits into our time frame perfectly.
Yeah.
Now, if they talk about the layers of rock, layers of ice, things like that, they always say that the deeper you go, the farther back into time you're looking. And it makes sense that things stack up in that particular order, so that must be the case. Well, the problem is, if you take mud in a jar and you shake it up, let's just say it's just water and dirt, okay? That's mud. You set it down and watch, and you'll find that it sorts into layers. Leave it there all day, okay? Yeah. The layers have accumulated in one day, but there might be hundreds of them. Okay. Sometimes you'll see those artistic sand things with, sand between two panes of glass and some oil. You flip it upside down and it makes this new pattern. Mm-hmm. There might only be 2 different weights of sand, and yet you end up with hundreds of layers. That's called hydrologic sorting, which means they're all about the same age. Yeah, the ones on the bottom, arrived maybe a few minutes before the ones at the top, but to separate them by millions of years is something you have to be faithful to believe. Right. The trouble is we know it's not true. This is going back to science. Here's how we know it's not true. There are trees that are called polystrate trees. Go ahead and Google this. Polystrate trees that connect all of the layers. You'll see a tree that's growing through all these, quote, millions of years of rock. Yeah. Well, this is a problem unless you're a creationist. You just look at it, okay, that's evidence of a flood, and the tree was buried by mud and rock and whatever, and it hydrologically sorted into where you found it. Yeah. But if you're not a Christian and you're trying to defy Christianity, go ahead, think for a second pause this and think of how this could have happened. Now, when you unpause it, I'm going to tell you how you might have explained it. You might have said, well, gosh, I only came up with 2 options. The first one would have been that the tree stayed standing after it died for millions and millions and millions and millions and millions of years while the rock built up around it. And in that time, it didn't blow over. It didn't even show signs of erosion or anything like that against its surface from wind or whatever else might have taken it. And somehow it just magically stayed standing. Okay. Option B, you might have said, well, maybe there was a seedling way down there at the bottom that grew for millions and millions and millions and millions and millions of years through solid rock, hoping that one day it would find sunlight. Okay. Neither of those things happened. Here's an obvious reason. It was in the flood. Here's just a couple more pictures. And if you Google this, guys, you'll find a bunch of them, but they've known about this for some time. Now, there was a guy there's a handful of people involved in this who've said that the Earth is at least, over 100,000 years old by evidence of ice layering. Okay. And they've drilled down in places where they found 100,000 years worth of evidence of a summer and a winter, because every time you cross a light and a dark layer, you're seeing a light spot where it was summertime and the water melted off and became ice when it refroze in the winter, covered by a dark spot where the snow load happened. And since it didn't all melt off the second round, you have what's left between those 2 layers, between the summer and the winter, and it alternates. Well, there's a huge problem with this. Okay. If you've ever sat in your car for an hour or less, maybe 10 minutes in the snow, you can watch with your wipers turned off, the snow build up into many little layers. Okay. And if it stops for, say, an hour, the one that's on the top is going to become solidified ice. If it gets hot, it's going to melt a little bit. You're going to have something similar. This only takes hot and cold, not summer and winter. It's a huge exaggeration, but I want to prove it. Mm-hmm. There was something known as the Lost Squadron. The Lost Squadron, I believe, was World War II. You can Google this. You can actually go visit these planes, I believe, still, if you want, out in Tennessee somewhere. The Lost Squadron were some planes that were landed out in Greenland. And they were covered by snow because they ran out of fuel. And someone decided to go back and dig them up if they could find them. But through use of ground penetrating sonar, they did. And basically disassembled these planes and brought them back and reassembled them here. And now they're part of a museum. When they melted down to find them, they passed through hundreds and hundreds of layers of summer and winter. Well, the problem is we know that's not the case. Right. It was 263 feet deep after only 48 years. Well, if you just do the math, you do it. They're talking 5.5 roughly feet of deposition per year. Okay. we also have these hundreds of layers. We know it's just hot and cold. That's all there is to it. But it does raise a new question. Okay, if that's the rate of deposition in some of these places where it's still depositing, why haven't we hit the equilibrium of that yet? Why is it that there's no evidence of billions of years on our ice caps, right? We see things melting away, things depositing, but they're not just in a 1-to-1 ratio. Some of these things are still growing and don't have any stopping in sight until such day as they just hit their equilibrium. Well, I have a theory about why it hasn't happened, and I'll bet you can guess what it is. We haven't had the time for it yet. The clock reset 4,400 years ago when we had the flood.
Yeah.
So human population is another good example of where the clock might have reset. And according to the Bible, 4,400 years ago when there was a flood, that's where it started over with just a handful of people. I believe it was 8 survivors on Noah's Ark. And if you look in one direction at the growth curve of our population, it grows exponentially, but you can also trace it back logarithmically and see it shrink down. And you won't go back for even 10,000 years. You'll find that it shrinks down in about 4,400 approximately. So there's just a lot of things you look at and go, this just doesn't add up with what I've been told. Yeah, well, maybe you should have just believed your Bible and not been ashamed of it. And maybe someone shouldn't have lied to you. I'm not saying it's all your fault, but the more time we spend in our scripture, the less easily swayed we are by this kind of nonsense.
Yeah.
The oldest organism that we're aware of so far on Earth is about 4,300 years old. It's a living bristlecone pine. And it's got a little bit of living tissue left on it, but it is interesting that there isn't something older than that. You kind of wonder why not? Well, I got a theory. If you look at Niagara Falls aerial view, you can find this. You'll find that the edge of it has eroded backwards considerably over the last, say, couple hundred years that we've been observing it. Okay. And sometimes in heavy flooding, it'll move just a few feet because there's so much flow going over the edge of the rock, it's tearing pieces off. So erosion is in one direction and water flows in the other. It's true of all waterfalls. And you start to wonder, why hasn't this thing reached its origin yet? Why is the mouth of it, where it's at? And if you start taking, tens of thousands of years, hundreds of thousands of years, you start going, why do we have waterfalls, especially over millions and billions? And I'm not the one making the claim. I don't have to defend it. But it's just ridiculous. Yeah. You look at the oldest desert we have, and it's still growing. That's the Gobi. And through this process of desertification, which requires a prevailing wind pattern to kill off, vegetation and whatnot, we've grown to something that appears to be about 4,000 years old based on the speed of its growth. There's just so many things here you look at and go, okay, so if the Earth is billions of years old, why isn't the snow deeper at the ice caps? So why do petrified trees penetrate so many rock layers? And why is the oldest living organism 4,300 years old? Why do we have waterfalls, right? You put these things together and you start going, shouldn't human population have at least reached its limit, its equilibrium? We're growing fast. I think the number was 6 billion people back when I was in 6th grade was our closest estimate. Look at it now. It's incalculable, but we think it's higher than we know. And the answer to all those questions is pretty simple. And if you're a Christian, this isn't your problem. The answer is God created everything 6,000 years ago. 4,400 years ago, there's a flood. And the evidence that we see points towards the Bible being correct. We have no reason to be ashamed of these things. So there are other dating methods that we can get into in future podcasts that are actually better. I think in astronomy, you'll find, I think, the greatest evidence we've got for a young universe. But I'll stop there for now. And when we go forward, just to kind of give you guys an overview of the topics we might cover, we'll talk about some macro scale stuff. We'll talk about some micro scale stuff. So from the universal level, planets and things like that, all the way down to the, let's just say down to maybe not subatomic, but darn close to it, all the DNA and things like that, proteins, macromolecules, and it all glorifies God. Everything. It's not just the heavens that declare his glory. I mean, if you start reading a biology book, it's amazing. And we'll get into those things more in the age of the earth. And we'll even talk about some of the troubles that have sprung from believing in this. For example, I'll just jump ahead on one thing, but we have evolution to thank for the Holocaust. We have evolution to thank for slavery in America, the way it was done here. Okay. We have evolution to thank for Planned Parenthood. People who, championed these stupid ideas justified their action through believing that they were actually helping the process of natural selection by doing it artificially and speeding it up, and we'll get into that stuff. But anyway, I hope this is useful to you guys, and certainly reach out to us if you have questions, things like that. We'd be happy to help.
Yeah, no, that was so good, even just for the intro episode. And we're going to get even in more depth in future episodes. And I love that you brought up 1 Timothy 6, verse 20. It says, knowledge or science falsely so called.
Yeah.
And I think there's such a huge separation of, it's either God or science. It's like, no, God created science.
Yeah.
There is a science that is falsely so called, but you can't separate God and science because science describes and understands how God made his creation.
Yeah, I've heard, it's funny, I heard it first said that scientists have the job of thinking God's thoughts after him. Recently, I heard Justin Erickson actually say theologians have that job. They're both correct, right?
Yeah.
We know him from his word. That's where the theologians are getting their understanding of him. And we know him from his creation. That's where the scientists who maybe don't even have God's word are getting their understanding of him. Yeah. It can't be denied. Right? Just a thought here. It says that we suppress the truth in unrighteousness, right? There is abundant evidence of creation when you just look around you. The symmetry of things. There's so much there that you look at and go, wow, this is beautiful. It doesn't exist. All of it doesn't have some reason, some symbiotic relationship. The codependency is not there and everything. There's certain things that God made just to be appealing, just to be beautiful, right? And there's a ton of evidence for it. So anyway, thank you. For taking the time.
Yeah, of course. Thank you for sharing that. That was so good. And we'll get more into that in future episodes. But listeners, we hope that was encouraging for you guys to just get a little bit of a better understanding of what creationists believe and what evolutionists believe. We thank you for joining us on this episode of the It Stands Written podcast. And Lord willing, we will see you on the next one.